Get the chain out, then you can go for the black mount. 13mm. Get those out. Just work it right out the bottom. This is a lot easier than it used to be. Maybe some of you have older units. Now we have these hex head bolts compared to those old mushroom style bolts that stripped out when you touched them with anything. If you see those mushroom style bolts on anything, there is a better replacement for it. They're stainless steel bolts. You can buy them from us or just jump online. So first we'll go through the black mount. To disassemble, you just pull the rail out. I have another one I'll show you over there. You should never be able to one hand pull this rail, move it at all. When that happens, these hard poly pads, the wear pads, are worn down, so it keeps everything tight so there's no metal on metal. When you have a good set of wear pads, these roller bearings don't even move. I always get that question. They'll have to replace the wear pads. They'll say the bearings aren't moving, and that's good. They're a secondary thing. So in this sledge, they're 2 big and 4 small. The small ones where it really grabs it, you can tell there's wear. If your finger can catch in here, that means they're worn down, and that's why it slides so easy. Put new ones on. I always snug them up with an impact. Put it back on. General rule with them, it's not always perfect, but you just snug them with an impact. And then use an Allen wrench to tighten them. Usually you snug them up, and it's usually about a half turn when you get new rails. If you go too tight, what's going to happen, they're going to wear or warm up a lot. Eventually it's going to stop the whole machine. You'll start feeling your rail. It'll even glow in some spots when it's really bad. So don't go too tight. These roller bearings are pretty easy to diagnose. I have 2 of them here. And you can touch them, like I said, when we're done. It should be nice and tight. If you're starting to get a lot of slop, or this one actually won't move at all, replace it, and you can see where it was rubbing on there. It just wasn't rolling, it was just grinding.
Josh, real fast, as far as the wear pads.
Yep.
Obviously, that's obviously a part that's going to wear, hence the name.
Absolutely.
How long, how many samples, or how many cores should you be thinking about looking at that?
We replace ours every season, before every season. Generally, we get 15,000 acres out of them, but it's almost like a time thing as well. I mean, guy can replace it in the winter, only sample 400 acres in the spring. By the time it comes down to fall, he'll run 1,000 acres. They'll be worn just because they've been squeezing the entire time. It just flattens them out. So it's not an exact science, but you just want the whole thing to be tight. If you start seeing that head move back and forth when you hit the buttons and your head just vibrating the entire way down. Your wear pads need to be replaced. And it's not the end of the world if you already plan on replacing your rails, but what happens in the vibration is it goes across, it's tied up here, then it starts vibrating here, and it just destroys the rail. Keep doing it, the spot's just going to get bigger and bigger. Eventually, the whole alignment of the ejector rod's not going to go through the hub right. So just try to, before every season, is just look at it. I mean, it's a probably 15-minute job to rip it apart. Spend the time, do it, look at your bearings, look at your chains, and know you're good for the season so you don't get in season and then have a breakdown. And those are never fun.
Safe in saying that if you don't replace those, it could cause a snowball effect as far as
Yes.
everything else
Absolutely.
falling to pieces.
All of a sudden your probe's catching your bucket as it opens, and it's just, yeah. After you take the wear pads out, the next thing I look at, I always just look straight down it. Just to make sure this is straight. Generally, we don't have a problem with this. If you have a probably 10-year-old machine, never replace the black mount. There are better ones out there now. Just more bracing. We really don't have any problems with these bending anymore, but we had in the past. Next spot you want to look at is where the piston connects. Your welds will start breaking around here, especially if you have a loose nut on your piston and it keeps going back and forth, so I always keep this nut tight. So you want to check your welds, make sure they're good. After I look it straight, make sure my welds are good, I look at these two bearings. These are very common to go out, especially if your chain's loose and starts going back and forth. The sprocket is just pressed on this bearing. It'll work its way completely off. You can see on this one, it's already not in the center. And then when you move it, it just catches all the time. This bearing is out. Eventually, this sprocket will come completely off the bearing, and then you're stuck in the field with no way to get it up. You also want to make sure that this bearing is not twisted. If you ever replace your black mount, there's little spacers that come in, that slide in here, so this black piece can't squeeze in. I've had multiple guys not know it, not look. They'll replace their black mount, but they won't take the spacers out of their old one. So when they tighten this bolt up, it pinches it and twists it, and then within a week, you've already spun that off and you've wrecked your black mount. I have an example over here. Probably kind of hard to see on here, but you can tell it's pushed down here on this side. You can see where it's scraped up, so that bearing was sitting over. And this was actually on one of our machines, and we ran 2 of these off in inside a week, and that was just because we didn't fix it correctly. Next thing you want to look at on the black mount is just this slide to soil box. It's what actually hits the bearing and opens the cup up. This is rarely a piece we replace. It can handle a lot of wear, but this soil bucket is adjustable. The bearing's offset, so you can turn the bearing so it opens faster, opens slower. If you have it opening too far and it's pushing too much pressure on the slide, it's going to wear it all the way down. Eventually, it's going to end up looking like this, where it's just a real fine razor edge, so there's not a whole lot for the bearing to hit, and then your soil cup's not going to open one of those times, and then it's going to stab your bucket. On these sledges, they can go bad. Pretty much When you take your old wear pad off and you grab a new wear pad, if you can't put it right on those studs and push it down with your finger, your sledge is twisted a little bit. So what that's going to do is when you actually tighten these 5 bolts down, you'll get them about finger tight and everything will lock up. It's going to grab one of these bearings really hard, and then you got to go back and replace the sledge because you just won't be able to get the bolts tight. So if you can't push it straight down with your finger and you have to use a hammer to get it down in those holes, your sledge is twisted, and just get a new one. It's not worth the fight. One thing we see missing a lot on these samplers that come into us, this bolt is like a secondary stop. So if your top sensor doesn't work, it doesn't see your middle sensor, so it doesn't look for your top sensor. This bolt is the stop for it, so everything can't come to the top and smash against the top. It just hits right on this yellow tower, and it just make sure you have one in here. They'll fall out, they'll vibrate loose. Everything will work properly, but your head's going to keep coming up way too far. Your tip's going to stick that far out of your probe, and then you'll send it down and it'll kick out of your probe. So just another thing to check to make sure that's in there and adjusted. This top roller wheel, there is a bearing inside. Rarely do we ever see any problems with this. You just pretty much got to make sure it spins.